August 12th, 1121. 100 men kneel before their king in the narrow gorge of Didgori, 40 kilometers west of Tbilisi. They know what comes next. Their mission is simple: walk into the enemy camp, claim desertion, and request an audience with the Seljuk commander. Then kill him. They will not return. Behind them, 20,000 Georgian warriors watch in silence as King David IV places his hand on each man's shoulder. No speeches, no promises of glory, just the weight of what must be done. Beyond the ridge, 100,000 Muslim troops gather under the banners of Damascus, Aleppo, and Mardin. A coalition so vast that medieval chroniclers will claim it numbered 800,000. It is the largest punitive expedition the Seljuk Empire has ever assembled. Their objective is to erase the Christian kingdom of Georgia from the map. David's army is outnumbered 5 to 1. Conventional tactics guarantee annihilation. The narrow valley prevents retreat. The Seljuks possess unlimited cavalry, superior numbers, and the momentum of a declared holy war. Mathematics demands Georgian defeat. Yet David has chosen this ground deliberately. The constricted terrain, the downhill approach, and the psychological pressure of having no escape all play into his strategy. Everything depends on a single gamble, which is to trade 100 lives to sever the enemy's head, then unleash total violence before they recover. The sacrifice detachment rises. They carry no shields and no heavy armor because speed matters more than protection. They must reach Ilghazi of Mardin, the Seljuk commander, before suspicion hardens into alarm. One chance, one strike. And if they fail, the deception costs everything. But if they succeed, Georgia survives. David watches them disappear into the morning haze. Behind him, Georgian officers begin their final preparations. Branches are dragged across the gorge's only exit. The path home is sealed. His soldiers understand the choice. It was either victory or martyrdom. No middle ground. In 3 hours, this valley will witness either the birth of a Georgian golden age or the extinction of the Bagrationi dynasty. The men kneeling before the Seljuk camp are already dead. The question is whether their sacrifice buys enough chaos for 20,000 warriors to destroy an empire's army before midday. For 30 years, Georgia didn't fight wars. It endured extinction. The period Georgians called Didi Turkoba, the Great Turkish Troubles, was not a series of battles. It was demographic replacement. Seljuk tribes arrived in waves, converting Georgian farmland into pastures for their herds. Agriculture collapsed. Villages emptied. The sedentary economy that sustained Georgian civilization simply ceased functioning. King George II, David's father, was unable to stop it. He paid annual tribute to Sultan Malik Shah I, a humiliation that symbolized total strategic defeat. The tribute didn't buy peace. It bought time while Turkish nomads transformed the occupied territory into grazing land. By 1089, the humiliation forced George II's abdication. He handed his 16-year-old son a kingdom that existed more in memory than in reality. David inherited ruins, but he also inherited legitimacy. The Bagrationi dynasty claimed direct descent from the biblical King David through Solomon. This was not decorative mythology. In a Christian kingdom facing Muslim conquest, that lineage carried immense psychological weight. David IV positioned himself as the shepherd king, the protector anointed by God. His subjects needed that narrative. 3 decades of defeat had shattered their belief in Georgian power. His first act as king was a strategic act of defiance. He stopped paying tribute. Around 1092, David ceased all payments to the Seljuks. He ended the seasonal migration of Turkish groups into Georgian territory. These were not symbolic gestures. They were declarations of total war against the established order. The Seljuks responded with invasions in 1105, 1110, and 1116. David repelled all three. But repelling raids wasn't enough. Georgia needed offensive capability, and David's solution violated every ethnic and religious boundary of medieval warfare. He resettled 40,000 Kipchak families from the northern Caucasus into Georgian lands. This was not charity. It was military procurement. The Kipchaks were Turkic nomads, cousins to the Seljuks, and largely non-Christian. David didn't care. He needed cavalry, and the Kipchaks provided 15,000 mounted warriors who could match Seljuk mobility. This decision reveals David's core philosophy. Survival demanded function over purity. His army became a deliberate composite. By 1121, David controlled most of southern Transcaucasia. He had reclaimed territories, rebuilt fortifications, and established diplomatic contact with Crusader states in Palestine. This rapid consolidation terrified Muslim powers across the region. The Seljuks watched a Christian kingdom expand aggressively, while their own Crusader enemies remained contained on the Palestinian coast. Georgia, not Jerusalem, became the priority threat. Sultan Mahmud B. Muhammad declared holy war. The coalition he assembled represented the full weight of regional Muslim power: Damascus, Aleppo, Malatya, Mardin, the Emirate of Tbilisi, and numerous Arab tribal forces. Ilghazi of Mardin, a veteran commander with decades of experience fighting crusaders, took overall command. Modern estimates place the coalition's strength between 100,000 and 250,000 troops. Medieval sources inflated the number to 800,000, but even conservative estimates gave the Seljuks a 5-to-1 advantage. David's intelligence network confirmed the scale. He knew what was coming. He also knew conventional defense guaranteed defeat. The Seljuks could simply surround Tbilisi and starve Georgia into submission. David needed a decisive battle fought on ground that negated the enemy's numerical superiority. He needed terrain that transformed Georgia's weakness into an advantage. He chose Didgori. The Didgori Valley is situated 40 kilometers west of Tbilisi, a narrow mountainous plateau bordered by steep ridges and dense forest. The geography creates a natural bottleneck. Large armies cannot deploy effectively. Cavalry charges lose coherence. Supply trains clog the approach roads. For an outnumbered defender, the terrain is perfect. For an overconfident attacker, it is a trap. David positioned his army on the high ground overlooking the valley. The Seljuk coalition, confident in its overwhelming numbers, advanced through the narrow pass. Ilghazi's scouts reported a much smaller Georgian force than expected. This intelligence reinforced Seljuk's assumptions. David was desperate, cornered, and vastly outmatched. The battle would be a formality. The scouts missed the psychological preparation happening on the Georgian side. David gathered his troops before the battle and delivered an address that transcended military logistics. He framed the coming fight not as a political conflict, but as spiritual warfare. Soldiers of Christ, if we fight bravely for our faith, we will defeat not only the devil's servants, but the devil himself. Then came the vow. David demanded that each soldier swear an oath to God. They would die before retreating. This was not a rhetorical flourish, but a binding covenant. To enforce it physically, David ordered his men to drag branches and timber across the gorge's only exit. The path home was sealed. Retreat became impossible. This act eliminated the paralysis that outnumbered armies face. Soldiers stop fighting effectively when they calculate survival odds. The instinct for self-preservation overrides tactical discipline. By removing escape, David removed calculation. His warriors could only move forward. Fear of death transformed into acceptance of martyrdom. The Seljuks, meanwhile, demonstrated the overconfidence that comes with superior numbers. Their light cavalry rode forward, shooting arrows and shouting insults at the Georgian lines. typical harassment tactics meant to provoke a premature charge. It didn't work. The Georgians stood motionless, absorbing the taunts without response. Ilghazi interpreted this as paralysis. He saw an army frozen by fear, waiting to be destroyed. He didn't see the 100 men approaching his camp under a white flag. The decoy force walked into the Seljuk camp, claiming desertion. Medieval chronicler Ibn al-Athir records that they requested an audience with Ilghazi, presenting themselves as Georgian soldiers who had abandoned a doomed cause. The story was plausible. Facing 5-to-1 odds, desertion made tactical sense. Ilghazi allowed them to approach. The moment they reached the command area, they launched an attack. No warning, no hesitation. They unveiled hidden weapons and struck at Ilghazi himself and his senior officers. The sudden violence created instant chaos. Guards rushed to protect the commander. The decoy force fought with suicidal intensity, knowing their mission ended in death regardless of the outcome. Ilghazi was wounded in the head. His son-in-law was also injured. The command structure disintegrated as officers either fled or died defending their leaders. The decoy force achieved its objective, complete decapitation of the Seljuk leadership. Not a single member of that detachment survived. They were murdered where they stood. However, the chaos they created spread rapidly throughout the camp. The massive coalition army, confined in the narrow valley, suddenly found itself leaderless. Units couldn't receive orders. Commanders didn't know whether the attack signaled a general assault or a localized incident. Uncertainty paralyzed decision-making. The tight quarters amplified the confusion. Soldiers couldn't see beyond their immediate surroundings. Panic began spreading through whispers and shouts. "The commanders are dead. We are surrounded. The Georgians are attacking." David didn't give them time to recover. The moment the chaos reached critical mass, he ordered the assault. The Hunt Frankish crusaders struck first, leading the frontal assault against the Seljuk vanguard. Their heavy armor and lances devastated the forward lines, forcing Seljuk archers into close combat where their mobility advantage disappeared. But the Franks were a distraction. The real blow came from the flanks. The Monaspa heavy cavalry, 5,000 of Georgia's elite mounted warriors, launched simultaneously from both ridges. They charged downhill. That detail is critical. Heavy cavalry derives its killing power from mass and momentum. The weight of armor, horse, and rider accelerates into a kinetic battering ram. Charging downhill multiplies that force significantly. The slope adds gravitational energy to the impact. The horses reach speeds impossible on flat ground. The collision becomes devastating. The Seljuks possessed no heavy cavalry to counter this assault. Their forces consisted primarily of light cavalry and archers, effective in open terrain, but vulnerable to shock tactics. Confined in the narrow pass, they couldn't maneuver. The Georgian cavalry crashed into them with the force of an avalanche. Lances punched through armor and bodies. Horses trampled infantry. The sheer physical violence of the impact shattered the Seljuk lines. Simultaneously, the Kipchak auxiliaries struck the rear. 15,000 mounted warriors, employing the same hit-and-run tactics the Seljuks used, now turned against them. The coordination was flawless. 3 separate hammer blows landed within minutes: the Frankish frontal assault, the Monaspa flank charges, and the Kipchak rear attack. The Seljuk coalition, already leaderless and confined, couldn't respond coherently to any single threat, let alone all 3. Ilghazi, wounded and barely conscious, was dragged from the battlefield by his bodyguards. With him went any hope of rallying the army. The coalition disintegrated into fragmented units. Each group acted independently, and most chose flight over resistance. The terrain that had previously prevented the Seljuks from deploying effectively now completely trapped them. The narrow valley became a killing corridor. Georgian cavalry pursued fleeing troops with methodical efficiency. The pursuit lasted for days, covering miles of broken ground as Kipchak horsemen hunted down stragglers. No organized retreat occurred. The Seljuk coalition simply ceased to exist as a fighting force. The entire battle, from initial contact to total collapse, lasted 3 hours. The speed of the Seljuk defeat reveals the vulnerability of mass. 100,000 troops sounds invincible until you understand the logistics of command and control. That many soldiers require coordinated leadership, clear communication, and shared tactical objectives. The Didgori coalition possessed none of these advantages. The army was a political construct, not a unified force. Contingents from Damascus answered to different commanders than units from Aleppo. Arab tribal warriors followed their own chiefs. The Emirate of Tbilisi's forces had conflicting interests with the Seljuk regulars. This fragmentation remained hidden, while victory seemed inevitable. The moment chaos erupted, the coalition's lack of cohesion became lethal. When Ilghazi fell, no clear successor was in place. Different units received contradictory information. Some commanders ordered forward attacks, others called for defensive formations. Most simply fled. The panic spread through a psychological contagion amplified by numbers. When a soldier sees thousands of allies running, the instinct for self-preservation overwhelms discipline. The retreat became self-reinforcing. More fleeing troops created more panic, which created more fleeing troops. The narrow terrain made any possibility of rallying impossible. In open ground, experienced officers might have formed rearguard defenses or organized phased withdrawals. The valley offered no such options. The Georgian cavalry controlled the high ground and the pursuit routes. Fleeing Seljuk soldiers couldn't escape the valley without passing through Georgian-controlled territory. The pursuit became a systematic hunt. Georgian casualties were minimal. Chronicles don't provide exact numbers, but the lopsided nature of the engagement is clear. The Georgians fought with overwhelming tactical advantage, surprise, terrain, unified command, and psychological momentum. The Seljuks fought in confusion, panic, and organizational collapse. The mathematics of combat shifted completely. Superior numbers became meaningless when those numbers couldn't be employed effectively. Ilghazi escaped with approximately 20 warriors. He returned to Mardin in disgrace, his reputation shattered. The coalition he commanded ceased to exist. Survivors scattered across the region, carrying reports of catastrophic defeat. The psychological impact was immediate. Georgia, once a tributary state paying annual humiliation payments, had annihilated the most significant expeditionary force the Seljuk Empire could assemble. The victory earned an immediate name in Georgian chronicles, Dleve Sakvirveli, the Miraculous Victory. One chronicler wrote, "What are the stories of Achilles or Alexander to me when I have seen the wonders of this day?" The hyperbole reflects genuine shock. Medieval battles rarely produced such decisive outcomes. Didgori was not merely a victory. Didgori was an annihilation. The strategic consequences materialized within months. In 1122, David IV marched on Tbilisi, Georgia's ancient capital, which had been under Muslim control since the Arab conquests. The city's garrison, aware of the outcome of Didgori, offered minimal resistance. David entered Tbilisi victorious, reclaiming the throne of his ancestors. Then came the moral test. Medieval warfare typically ended with a massacre. Conquered cities, especially those holding different faiths, faced systematic slaughter. The High Middle Ages offered countless examples of victorious Christians butchering Muslim populations and vice versa. David had every cultural precedent and religious justification for revenge. He chose otherwise. Arab historian Alini records that David respected the feelings of the Muslims living in Tbilisi. He abolished taxes on Muslims and Jews for 1 year. He expressed explicit concern that the Muslim population might flee. and he actively worked to prevent their departure. This was not a display of mercy, but a matter of statecraft. David understood that economic prosperity required human capital. Tbilisi's Muslim merchants, artisans, and administrators possessed skills and trade networks essential for rebuilding Georgian power. Slaughtering them would satisfy religious zealots, but cripple the kingdom's economy. David's tolerance was calculated pragmatism, the same principle that guided his recruitment of Kipchak warriors and Frankish mercenaries. The policy worked. Tbilisi became Georgia's new capital, marking the beginning of the medieval Georgian Golden Age. Trade routes reopened. Agriculture recovered. The kingdom's multi-ethnic and multi-religious composition became a source of strength rather than weakness. David's reputation transformed from that of a warrior king to David the Builder, a title reflecting his understanding that victory in battle was meaningless without competent governance to follow. His decision also validated the moral framework of the entire Didgori campaign. The sacrificial detachment, the vow of no retreat, and the calculated violence were all ruthless acts meant to achieve a specific end: Georgian survival and prosperity. The tolerance in Tbilisi proved that the war was never about religious extermination. It was about reclaiming functional sovereignty. David IV fought at Didgori with personal intensity that bordered on recklessness. Chronicles record that 3 of his horses were killed during the battle before he mounted a 4th to finish the engagement. This wasn't symbolic leadership. He positioned himself at the point of maximum danger, personally absorbing the same risks he demanded of his troops. This behavior served a specific moral function. The biblical King David, his namesake, remained in Jerusalem while ordering the death of Uriah, the Hittite, in battle to cover his adultery with Bathsheba. The story in 2 Samuel represents leadership corruption, prioritizing the king's safety over the lives of subordinates, all to serve private sin. David IV consciously inverted this model. He placed himself at the front of every charge, ensuring that the catastrophic risks he imposed on others applied equally to him. The sacrifice detachment died on his orders, but David made those orders while standing beside soldiers who would execute the main assault moments later. The vow of no retreat applied to the king as much as to ordinary soldiers. This shared risk legitimized his most ethically fraught decisions. Trading 100 lives to decapitate enemy command is cold pragmatism that resembles murder more than warfare. But when the king who orders that sacrifice also risks his own death in the subsequent assault, the moral calculus shifts. The soldiers who died weren't pawns sacrificed from safety. They were casualties in a strategy where everyone, including the king, accepted the possibility of death. David's personal courage created the psychological foundation for Georgian discipline. His warriors fought with absolute commitment because their commander demonstrated the same level of commitment. The 3 dead horses became proof that David's covenant was genuine. He didn't ask his soldiers to accept risks he refused to share. After Didgori, this moral identity shaped David's reign. His policies of religious tolerance, economic reconstruction, and multi-ethnic governance all reflected the same principle. The king's duty was to ensure national survival and prosperity, rather than pursuing personal glory or religious purity. The Builder became the defining title because David understood that winning battles meant nothing if the kingdom couldn't sustain itself afterward. The Georgian Golden Age, which followed the Battle of Didgori, lasted for a century, producing cultural and architectural achievements that defined medieval Caucasian civilization. David's daughter, Tamar, would become queen and further expand Georgia's influence. The dynasty David preserved through calculated ruthlessness at Didgori became the foundation for generations of Georgian independence and prosperity. The Battle of Didgori was resolved in 3 hours on August 12, 1121. The The strategic planning that made those 3 hours possible took 30 years. David IV inherited a kingdom destroyed by the Great Turkish Troubles and rebuilt it through pragmatic military reforms that violated every contemporary boundary of faith and ethnicity. His composite army, comprising Georgians, Kipchaks, Alans, and Frankish mercenaries, existed solely to preserve Georgian sovereignty. The victory depended on ruthless calculation. 100 men died in a planned deception intended to destroy the enemy's command. 20,000 warriors fought under a covenant that eliminated retreat. The tactics were brutal, the risks catastrophic, and the moral weight immense. David legitimized these choices by sharing the danger personally, fighting at the front until 3 horses died beneath him. The aftermath revealed David's ultimate priorities. He could have massacred Tbilisi's Muslim population. He chose tolerance and tax exemptions instead, securing the human capital necessary for economic reconstruction. The builder, not the conqueror, became his legacy because he understood that military victory was only the first step toward national survival. Didgori demonstrated that overwhelming numerical superiority becomes worthless when command collapses and terrain prevents deployment. The Seljuk coalition's size amplified its vulnerability rather than its strength. Panic spread faster through 100,000 troops than through 20,000. The narrow valley prevented the alliance from leveraging its advantage while allowing Georgian heavy cavalry to maximize kinetic force through downhill charges. Modern Georgia commemorates Didgori annually with a festival called Didgoroba, celebrating the unity and courage that enabled its survival against extinction. The battle remains the defining moment of Georgian medieval history, the hinge between foreign subjugation and the Golden Age. One chronicler's assessment endures. What are the stories of Achilles or Alexander to me when I have seen the wonders of this day? The 100 men who died to create chaos in the Seljuk camp remain unnamed in the historical record. Their sacrifice was pragmatic, not glorious. They walked into certain death because their king calculated that trading their lives could save the kingdom. David's genius was in recognizing that calculation was necessary. His moral authority came from standing beside his soldiers when the main assault followed, 3 horses dying beneath him as he fought to justify the price he had demanded. Didgori proved that discipline and terrain can overcome numbers. It proved that multi-ethnic armies united by a shared sense of survival can defeat religiously motivated coalitions. Most importantly, it proved that the hardest victories are won not by the strongest warriors, but by leaders willing to make catastrophic gambles while accepting the same risks they impose on others. David IV's legacy rests not on the 3 hours of violence at Didgori, but on the 30 years of state building that preceded it and the tolerant governance that followed. The battle was miraculous, the statecraft was deliberate,